Once again, my privilege to be here. I think it's the last installment, the last year. It's not an installment. It's actually about Chodesh Elul in the series. It's not the last year. Mitzvah Shem. You never know. There'll be other times, of course, even if we have to wait for next summer. But in this series of Shiurim, in the summer of Tov Shin Pei Beis, I believe this is the final one. And the topic is about Chodesh Elul, how it is brought out in Chassidus, how we understand, how we see it through the lens of Chassidus. Everything in Chassidus is given a whole different appreciation because it shows you the deeper dimension. It shows you what's deeper and the essence of it, the truth of it, compared to the external, which is the external of the truth. And you only appreciate the external of the truth as part of the truth if you see the truth as well. So, and just as a little hakdama, a little introduction, the actual share I want to review, a general review. It's not at all to be taken as a substitute for studying the Maimer itself, but I want to give a general review of the Maimer, Anila Dovid Li, that the Rebbe said in Tov Shin Chovav, and it came out in a kuntras in Tov Shin Nun. And it's printed in Sefer Maram Elukot Chelik Daled. It's a Maimer, and a Maimer requires in-depth analysis and focus, and we don't have the kind of time to go through a whole Maimer in 1 hour. But before we get into a general review of the Maimer, just to get the idea and come away with the inspiration that the Maimer could impart with us, just to talk about a little bit of Elul. We know that Elul is the month that we do a cheshbon, a nefesh. We review and we reckon and go calculate carefully and examine what was going on over the past year, what needs to be corrected, and how we can plan to do it better the next year. There are 5 psukim. There are other places in Ma'amar Razal also, but there are psukim in Tanakh that the avodah of Elul is based and is indicated by the meaning of these psukim, the deeper meaning of these psukim. Each one refers to a different aspect of avodah and Chodesh Elul. We know that we have Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed. The world stands on 3 pillars: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. So when a person is going to focus on his Avodas Hashem, it's going to include these basic 3 pillars of Avodah that should be done with greater intensity and greater care, because it's correcting what happened and it's also preparing for how it'll be done. So we're dealing with general ideas, general concepts or general dimensions in the avodah of a yid. So it's going to focus on the general avodah of tefillah, the general avodah of Torah, tefillah, and gemilas chasadim. We also have those things that apply in this time of the year, and that is Torah, Hisofa and Torah, Tshuva, and we have Tshuva, Tefillah, Tzedakah. So again, we have those same, not as pillars, but as what brings and helps us to be inscribed for a good year. So they overlap kind of, but at the same time, they have their own expression. One is more as a correction, as a tshuva, as doing it to prepare yourself for being inscribed and receiving all the hashpahs that we need for the coming year. And Ashloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed is a constant. So let's talk about the psukim for a moment. we know the pasuk, the most famous pasuk that's associated with Chodesh Elul, which is a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, and it says, "Ani l'doidi v'doidi li." I am to my beloved, meaning the Eibishter, who's so connected, strongly attached, and one with us, which has to be revealed in the month of Elul. And there is another pasuk in Shir Hashirim that says "Doidi li v'ani loi," which is the reverse order. But the avodah of Elul, as we're soon going to talk about in the Maimer, is all about the avodah that starts from below, from the tachton, from the yid, reaching upwards and climbing upwards to get closer to Hashem, beginning from his point, from his level that he is on, and trying to reach higher by climbing and doing what it takes to get closer to the Eibishter from below, from milmato l'mayla. And doidi li v'ani lo is the opposite seder. That's why it's taken, this pasuk that says ani doidi li is taken to describe what the avodah of Elul is. It's brought in the Avudraham, actually. I think that's the source. And of course, it's became so widespread. There's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe in the Likutei Torah in Parshas Re'eh that starts with this Dibur HaMaskil, starts with this pasuk, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. And what is this as a particular aspect? This is the avodah of tefillah, because connection. I am Ani l'doidi, and tefillah is a ladder that begins from the bottom. So Ani l'doidi is the order in which tefillah is done, and it's the goal, and it is the objective to get closer and become one with Hashem. As we know that tefillah also has a meaning in the word connection, putting things to be stuck together, like a teufel kli cheres, as many times mentioned in the Chassidus. So that's tefillah. Then we have another pasuk that describes no special order. I'm probably mixing up the order the way it's typically or normally, most of the time, regularly stated. But we have tzedakah, we have Gemilas Chasadim, and that is a pasuk in Megillas Esther. Yeah.
I saw two translations for that pasuk. On wedding invite, some people have it on top. I am my beloved's apostrophe S. And the translation you gave is I am to my beloved. Is there any difference between the two?
The result is the same, but the difference is that I am to my beloved is what's bringing out on my beloved. Why am I seeking and how am I revealing this connection is really the avodah. So I would say, to me, I'm not going to argue because I'm sure that they have what to base it on. Those that write these translations, they're not just picking it out of their head, But to me, it would make more sense. I am to my beloved, and the reaction from my beloved is that he's to me. That means we're not looking at the way it really is, we're looking at how it is exposed, how it's brought out to be seen, to be noticed, to be recognized. Okay, but good point. And so in the pasuk in Megillas Esther, it says, Ish l're'ehu umatonis lav yoinim. And that's talking about giving to others, which is very much Gemilas Chasadim. And that what the same Lashon Tevis, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, is Elul Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed, just in case I didn't point it out. And Ish l're'ehu umatonis lav yoinim is also Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed. And then we have Torah. What is Torah? We know that Torah, in Gemara Makkos, it says, Divrei Torah koiltin. Torah is what takes someone into its own protection, like a Arei Miklat, like the city of refuge.
Includes?
Absorbs. That means you're in the confines of Torah and you're protected and you're in your own zone where you're safe. To explain all that, right now, I'm not going to go into the idea of Torah taking someone into its own zone and protecting that person. But Ina liyadi v'samti lecha is the Torah saying, I'm preparing for you a city to run away. And the way Chassidus explains it, running away from a killer is what the Torah is talking about. Who's the killer? Well, we're talking about a person's own struggle within himself, an internal struggle, and the killer is none other than the Yetzer Hara, than the Satan. And he has to run away from this killer because when he causes him to do an Aveda, it's like spilling blood. As explained in depth, because his whole being alive, that moment is for the sake of serving Hashem. And if he doesn't serve Hashem at that moment because he was pulled in and he was coerced by the opposition, by the opponent, then it's like he's spilling his blood. He's spilling the blood of the Nefesh Elikis, which is only down here in a physical body and in a form of life that's in this world, only for the sake of not falling into this. So this is like ruining the person's life. The person's soul is going through some sort of death. So he has to run away from the killer. He has to run away from the one that's trying to kill him. And where do you run? You run to the Ari Miklat. And where do you run where you're protected? You run to Torah. I don't want to get too much carried away because I want to save time for the moment, but just to explain what Torah does, as we can see it in our own selves. There's the reality of Torah, which is the true reality. The Eibishter looked in the Torah as someone looks in a blueprint, and the Eibishter created the world. If it comes from Torah, then Torah it cannot be any less of a reality than what comes out of Torah, what comes as a result of following the Torah's outline. Actually, if there is a discrepancy, then the Torah is the real true fact, the real true existence, and whatever looks that way is because it appears that way. So if a person wants to get away from the persuasions, from the pressure, from the temptations of the Yetzer Hara, and he can't overcome those temptations, he needs to run to a place where he's safe, to the American embassy in that city, or in that country. So thank God these days it's in Yerushalayim, huh? Finally. And he needs to get out of this line of fire because it's too hard for him to resist. He goes to Torah, he immerses himself in Torah, and he finally becomes opened up to a different reality. It's like he's in a total different world. The world of truth, the world of fact, the world of not imagination or hallucination or any kind of optical illusion. No. And then he feels free because he sees a whole different truth. That's really what Torah does. People sit and learn, they feel so good, they feel so relieved. The stresses, the pressures. I know when they come home and they see the bills, it comes back. I don't have the answers for everything, but maybe you should spend more time learning and less time looking at the bills. I don't know. Of course, the Eibishter gives bracha. When you learn Torah, you dedicate yourself to Torah, so the Eibishter takes care of. If a person dedicates himself to serve Hashem, the Eibishter will make it more doable, easier, take away the challenges. And then we have Torah, Avodah. What's Avodah? Avodah, we said, is Tefillah. And then we have the pasuk that talks about and umal avay lekecha es levavcha ves levav. We're talking about tshuva. What's the es levavcha ves levav? It's in Chumash Devarim, and the Eibishter says, Mashiach comes, I'm going to circumcise your heart. Don't try that at home, because you don't circumcise the heart physically, God forbid. Or that will be the last circumcision you'll be go through, or whoever else is going through it. But circumcise the heart means the whole idea of circumcision is Odlas Halev. There's a part of a skin, not the membrane. It's more of a thicker skin that covers the place where you do the bris. And the Eibishter wants it to be exposed, not to be covered. What does covered mean? It takes away the ability to sense it, to feel it. It's like wearing gloves and trying to feel something. It doesn't have, it's stuffing up the person's heart and doesn't take away and doesn't leave sensation. So that is a metaphor for a person's inability to feel Hashem. He's numb. And that's why the Eibishter says, I'm going to circumcise your heart. I'm going to take away that layer, figuratively, that part of you. It's not only figuratively, because the heart is what feels. So I'm going to take away that part of you that's stopping you from being inspired, from being sensitive and being awakened, responding to things that are going on that you just have no way of feeling. You're numb. And there's two levels of priya. There's the thicker skin, and then there's the membrane, which is a thin skin that also has to be removed. And there's a part that we could do, and there's a part that only the Eibishter could do. That's why it says, "Amol Hashem lekecha es levavcha ve'es levav." The Eibishter is going to take off that part that covers the heart, that causes the heart to be insensitive. That the Eibush is going to do for us. But the whole idea of this pasuk is talking about how you will be able to come closer and back to Hashem and feel Hashem and not be distant. So that's the avodah of tshuva. Then we have another pasuk that talks about geula. So there's the three internalized, there's the three more invested within the person's consciousness and within the person's abilities. Those are the three. Toila, avodah, and gemilas chasadim. It works with the person's understanding, with the person's feelings, with the person's abilities. It's more through the channels of the person's existence. But then you have two. You have tshuva and you have geula. So tshuva, I just said, is a malavai lekecha es levavcha ve'es levav. So es levavcha ve'es levav is Elul, Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed, which is a pasuk referring to a yid coming back closer to Hashem. It says v'shavta ad Hashem alikecha, and you return all the way to the Eibishter. It's all talking about the idea of tshuva. And then you have one that's in Oz Yashir, Shira LaHashem Vayomru Leimer, and that is geula. The Shira for going out of Mitzrayim actually was the culmination of the Yidden not only getting out of Mitzrayim, but getting rid of the Mitzrayim. That means it was a final and a complete geula. That's when they were sealed. And so we have the inyan of geula. So the Rebbe explains that the three avodas that are more internal and they're more within the person himself are permeated with the two encompassing avodas, in the sense that they don't have any limitations. They can override, supersede any obstacles, any barriers, which is tshuva, as we know. How could you do tshuva? How does a person rise above it? And how does he undo something that's already done? Because tshuva is not limited to any of the conditions that we have in the world that we're in. It's not limited to anything, mainly time, but space also. It's anything that stops the nature, the natural course of not allowing it to happen. It rises above that. Like, I guess when people discovered and they saw the plane, the Wright brothers were flying a couple of 100 yards, and they said, wow, you mean there's no issue with traffic lights or with a double parked car or with a garbage truck picking up garbage? This is amazing. We're rising above it. But that in itself would be something that's beyond the normal state of nature. This was a big breakthrough. So tshuva basically eliminates any of those internalized, embedded natural restrictions. It just has a power. And we know when somebody's very desperate, he can perform and he can do things that he would never have been able to do in a normal circumstance. So the tshuva brings out the essence of the soul of a yid, And that gives the Yid the ability to rise above otherwise what would be, in normal cases, which would be a barrier. And the Inyan is that we have to infuse our Avodas Hashem, which is within our nature, with our natural ability, which is much more conventional. But we have to infuse it with the super strengths, the supernatural strengths that Tshuva and Geula present. So here you have the 5 psukim in Tanakh, and here you have the 5 ideas that we focus on in Chodesh Elul. But now we're going to go in with the remaining time, even though I just took off too much from what I would have liked to have, but Hashem will give us hatzlacha, like the Baal Shem Tov at the Fitzes Adera. Talk about supernatural. So we're going to talk about a mimer that the Rebbe, like I said, the Rebbe said in 1966. And it was given out. That means the Rebbe, it was prepared for editing, and the Rebbe checked it over and gave his approval in this form that we have here, and that was given out in Tafshin Nun in 1990. And this is a mimer that left a big mark on me. Yes. The simple answer is no. Because the whole idea of tshuva is, and this is not mean, because they have pity on us, that we're the ones who have to go through all this difficulties. It's not like, I mean, today you have a man want to be a woman, a woman want to be a man, but everybody really is who they are, and whatever Hashem made them, that's what they want to be. That's the beauty of everything, because everyone has his own role and his own mission. In that sense, nobody could be somebody else. So they have their avodah, they have their reason for existing. They don't have the same consciousness. So on a superficial level or an external level, they could do tshuva.
But tshuva was existing before the Lord, the Bnei Adam, that's before the Jews.
Yes, but the type of tshuva that we're talking about, which is connected to the essence of Hashem, is only with something that is made of the essence of Hashem, and they're not made of the essence of Hashem. They are made of Hashem, but the Eibishter blew, Vayipach ba'apav, he blew in a soul, a godly soul into man, which is representative of the Nefesh Elikis. That's what it is. And Adam wasn't a Jew, but this is all where we got this. We got from Adam, because Adam in himself, he had that continuation where the Jew came from, right? And that's exclusive to a Yid. So the pasuk is V'haruach toshuv elikim asher nesana. The spirit, which means the godly soul, is going to return. Is going to do tshuva, return to the Eibishter that gave it, that placed it inside the person, which means it's a piece of God. And that kind of tshuva is not the tshuva that we're talking about. Of course, people do tshuva. People goyim steal, and then they have regrets, and they in many cases they become reformed, and they go straight on the straight path. And whether other things between a person and his wife, one spouse and another, there's regret, and there's sorry, and there's correction, and the correction lasts. Or even if it doesn't last very long, or it's only for a moment, it's tshuva. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the Yid being a piece of Hashem. And that is only a Yid. So, Ani ledoidi v'doidi li, the pasuk says, it's a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. In Shir Hashirim, chapter 6, pasuk Gimel, and there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe. This is I finished already saying, I said it earlier, and the Alter Rebbe says, this is the Rosh Tevis of Elul. What is the idea of Elul? The idea of Elul is the effort on the part of the Jew. That means the initiative, the effort that the Jew is starting the process, and it's coming from within him to reach towards Hashem, and to then in turn trigger a reaction from Hashem. Who's the initiator? The initiator is the Yid. That's why this pasuk depicts what Elul is. Ani l'doidi, l'doidi li. And with that, so that's Elul. And the Alter Rebbe continues and says, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that's already when it's the other way around, when it's a revelation from above, when there is a energy that is initiating the beginning, that's initiating the start of an inspiration. And this energy from above comes first. And the Jew experiences this energy and he reacts. So in our Avodas Hashem, both of these are part of what we have to have. Our Avodah must include, and as it's explained, Chassidus, and not just Chassidus, but Chassidus explains it in the depth, that when we learn Torah, it's from above. We're receiving, we're taking in Hashem's Torah that's given to us from Him. But when we refine our animal soul, which is the time for that is during davening mainly, then we are doing milmata l'mayla. As I said before, that when Yaakov had a dream that there was a ladder and the angels were going up and down, and so that's referring to davening, that you go from the ladder, you start on your level and you try to go up higher and higher till you reach the ultimate your goal. So when do we have Isarus L'Tata, the lower initiative? That's El. When do we have the initiative from the above? That is already a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's all going to be explained. And I know that someone's thinking already of this question, like, what do you mean? How does anything start without Hashem? So it's going to be it's going to be mentioned, and we'll take care of that in a moment. And the Alter Rebbe says that the Avodah of Elul is actually the Hakdama, the prerequisite for the successful Avodah that follows in Hashanah Yom Kippur. That means if a person wants to be able to receive this great, grand, spectacular, sensational revelation from above, which is a lot more enjoyable and a lot more inspirational, but you can't handle that because it's too glorified. So you have to have the Avodah of Elul, which prepares, which refines the person, conditions the person enough that when that initiative happens from above, he'll be in a position to absorb it.
When a person is davening, he goes through the blessings and reading the words, and he understands what he's saying, and he's concentrating to what he can concentrate. Is he going up the ladder, or does he need to actually picture and meditate and think about going up the ladder, or just by reciting the words of Chazal, is that enough?
Okay, I like to look at it as acclimation. I once had someone came to my house to put in some what do they call these, laminate floors? And laminate, yeah. And he left it inside the house, a whole stack of them. And my wife told one of my kids to take it out to the porch. What does that have to stay? They're coming back the next day or two later. So until they come back, I got very upset. The guy said, don't take it outside. No, don't do that. I especially put it here. Why? Because before we install it, these strips of wood have to acclimate to the house. It's true enough that somebody would claim it. You know what I mean? There is a lot of truth to this stuff. So a general outside impression will help for a person to climb as well. Knowing that I'm davening now to Hashem, understanding a little bit I can, being in a place where there's another 9 Yidden, and feeling that Kedusha, wearing that tefillin. But the real climbing the ladder, of course, would be through meditation, because there's so much more to what's going on in the davening, that the deeper understanding, which is when the person has much more of a conscious climbing of the ladder. But if he's in this kind of environment, he is much holier, and it's just by being part of that what's going on. Okay, so the Rebbe is going to mention that we have to say that it's not just an introduction or a prerequisite. We have to say that there is already, and this is the Rebbe's way of, actually the Alter Rebbe is addressing this in a different form, but the Rebbe really gets into it. And Elul is Ani L'Doidi. So why don't we just call it El? If the Avodah of Elul is really all about the Yid's Avodah coming from the Yid, and we're not right now focusing or dealing with what comes from Hashem, that's the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So then the question would be, why does it have the Vav Lamed, V'doidi Li? Like, come on. No, this is the name of the month, and there's a pasuk that spells out the avoid of this month, and it seems that it has two letters there that don't belong in that month's avodah. It's not part of this avodah. You can't have the Yid initiating, and at the same time stress and emphasize the initiative of the Eibishter, because then it's taking away. If it's something that has to come from the Yid, and the Eibishter is like saying, okay, you stay there, I'll do it for you, then the Yid's not doing it. There's a certain value in the Yid doing it. It's very important. As a matter of fact, it's more dear to the Eibishter. It's more precious to the Eibishter. What's better, if your child that's 20 years old or 15 years old rattles off the 12 psukim by heart, or your child that's 3 years old or 2 years old rattles it off by heart? Well, it's a much greater appreciation. It's a much greater joy. The Yid is all about being so much given over to the Eibishter that he's able and he does these things. The Eibishter doesn't have to Yid doing the Avodah. So therefore, we have a problem right off the bat. How do we see this as a hakdama, as an introduction, as a conditioning, when it's already in play during the month of Elul? It's already in play. It's not just you have to have this so it'll enable that. And the Alter Rebbe is actually going to come to this topic, to this issue, from a different, not so spelled out, not so defined. But the Alter Rebbe is going to deal with another question. We know that in Chodesh Elul we have the presence, exposed 13 attributes of mercy, which are like, that's the hot button. Nothing stops these 13 attributes, and it's coming from a very, very high place, above the channels of the progression of how the world gets its energy from Hashem. It's like we said before. It's just overrides.
Do you need a minion, or can you do it alone?
The presence of that Gila is in the world.
So I can say right now?
No, that's in the world, but there's conditions on when we could evoke it or say it, so on. But the presence, the energy of these 13 attributes are present in Chodesh Elul more than regular times.
Could you bring a share of those 13 ones?
I'm sure. Then again, like I can probably score a half-court three-pointer, but I may miss here and there because I could, and I know that if it really counts, I'll try my best, and eventually I will get it. But the catch is that you have to condition yourself to be that moment of where it really counts, and take advantage of that, and make sure you did everything you had to do before that in that same day, or maybe your hand will just give a little twitch and it'll be off by that much. Anyway, so the Rebbe says over here, how do we have this? And the answer comes from the Alter Rebbe. In the Maimer, the Rebbe is actually, which the Rebbe does a lot of times, will go through a Maimer of a Rebbe before, focus on that Maimer, and teach the Maimer in a way that we would never have understood it that way. So the Rebbe is really going to explain what the Alter Rebbe is saying. And the Alter Rebbe is saying that in this month, Elul, is when the presence and the exposed energy of the 13 attributes of mercy are present in a strong way.
Like Yom Kippur, the day atonement, you don't do anything, you can sleep and you're good. You're saying Elul is like Elul atonement or something.
Yes, very much that way, but it gets more, the plot thickens. Wait a second. Because Yom Kippur does inspire me, because it is a day. Let's just take it slow over here. So, why? Why do you have to say there's the presence of the 13 attributes of mercy? Why are we even focusing on it? Unless it's going on now. How could it be going on now and not take away from the effort of the person below who's doing it because it's coming from him? If you're telling me the attributes of mercy are present, but that we know from Kabbalah, that we know from different sources. Clearly, the attributes of the 13 attributes of mercy are present in Elul. That's not the issue of discussion. We're not figuring it out. We're saying, oh, it must be that. That's a fact. So the Alter Rebbe says there's something very interesting about this revelation that comes from above and other revelations that come from above. Normally, when we have the presence of the 13 attributes of mercy, the world is in a different state. When is it there a presence of these 13 attributes, which means a great high level of Hashem that's not limited to anything? Comes from the essence of Hashem. We have either it's Shabbos or it's Yom Tov, Yom Kippur. Why do we have these days? Why are these days different? Why can't we do any malacha? In Yom Tov, we can't do malacha, but we could do oichel nefesh. We could cook. In Shabbos, you can't even cook. In Yom Kippur, not only you can't cook and you can't do any malacha, but you can't even have the normal involvement with the world around you, with the physical world around you, namely eating. Why is that? Because when there is a presence of the 13 attributes of mercy, the world is a different world. It's holier. It loses its coarseness. And the Yid has to adjust himself to be able to handle, to be able to receive this oil. He has to remove himself to a certain degree from the coarseness of this world. And depending on how holy the presence of this energy is, that would be what is restricted. So Yom Tov is not as holy as Shabbos, so it's less disconnecting. Shabbos is holier than Yom Tov, it's less disconnecting. And Yom Kippur is even holier than that, even though we're not going to get into the punishment. It's Yom Kippur is actually Kores, and Shabbos is Skila, but it's the day itself is a holier, is a certain, it symbolizes the one day of the whole year, that Kodesh HaKadoshim and Shabbos Shabbosain and all that. But so the Alter Rebbe says, yes, we have something unconventional. We have the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim present, but we have a regular weekday. Elul days are regular weekdays, besides the regular Shabbosim that come in because of the cycle, because of the way it is, how it works with the cycle. So if there's a presence of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, then it must be shattering. It must be something that creates a different type of world. How can we have weekdays? And this is what the Alter Rebbe says. It's there. But it's there not as an inspirational force. It's there as the enabling force. Now this sounds kind of crazy, but the Alter Rebbe gives the famous mashal. It's the most famous mashal in Chassidus, and there's so many mamarim on this mashal, and that is the Melech Basada. So the Alter Rebbe says, in order for you to be able to understand this, I'm going to give you a mashal. A mashal, generally, or by definition, a mashal is used not because people are getting tired and you say something interesting. It's cute, it's nice, and that helps also. But a mashal is, without this metaphor, without this analogy, you won't understand the thing itself you're trying to understand. So the Alter Rebbe gives a mashal which helps us understand this concept, how two different opposites can be going on at the same time. And this is the mashal that's so beautiful because it fits in such a way that you could tell that it's chassidus, that it's Torah, it's divine. It's not just someone coming up with nice analogies. The king is in the field. In Elul, the king is in the field. In Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the king is in his palace. Very interesting thing. The king is in the field. What does that mean? When the king is in the field, it doesn't mean the king happens to have ended up in the field. The king is now as someone who is dressed and who is adjusted to being in the field. That's what it means, being in the field. Access, exactly. Okay, so if the king was in the field like he is in the palace, right, exactly. But there's more than just access, there's awe. When the king is clothed in the royal garb, and he's with all his servants, and he's with a whole big to-do, and the chamber, the royal chamber, and the royal this and the royal that, you become awe-stricken. So it's not just the idea that the king is in the field in itself is already something that is much more ordinary. That means the king is an ordinary place. That in itself allows more access. But the king is dressed like a person in the field, like a farmer. And the king is very much on the outside, very much like the regular guy next to me on the train. There's no fear, there's no shock, there's no overwhelming awe that I can't. So, but which king is it? Inside, it's the same king. The glory of the king is what we compare to the initiative and Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, which automatically, when someone sees something so awesome, that will dictate the person's reaction. Why? The person is not focusing and creating this scenario or this scene in his mind. You know, someone says, let me see you make yourself cry. So no, it's not an easy thing. Actors know how to do it. But yeah, give me 5 minutes. Let me think of something very sad that happened to me. Let me focus, let me concentrate, and I'll cry. Some people could, some people can't, some people need a longer time, but it's not something that comes automatic. It's something that you have to create from within you, because right now you're in a great place. There's everything you want. There's the right temperature, and there's beautiful music, and there's such good food, and I'm loving every second of it. I'm meeting people I never saw for so many years, and I'm close friends. It's beautiful here. Someone tells you, go cry. You have to induce something that's not really present. But when there's awe, but it's the glory of the king that's there, it's doing the whole job for you. It's doing the whole job for you, and your reaction is going to be automatically to feel according to what it is that the king is revealing. And so normally when we say an initiative, what are we saying? Let me give you an example. There's a guy who has to make a living. I'll give you my own examples, which would be a good example of how it's not an example into this, as you'll see. Now someone comes to the guy and says, listen, the guy's sleeping. His friend, his uncle, his brother comes to him and says, listen, I found you a job. And you have to get up now. You have to get up and go. I'll tell you where to go. Depends on the situation, but if we're talking about someone who doesn't even understand, doesn't know what it means and how desperate he is to go work because they're about to evict him, the marshals are coming, he just doesn't get it. He forgot. He saw a letter, but he forgot. And if someone doesn't understand how going to work will help him, so telling him you have to get up is not going to be enough. You probably have to bring in his wife and kids who are wearing tattered clothes and are emaciated from hunger. And you have to create a situation that this guy should suddenly, oh, yeah. So that's shock and awe. That's already the glitz, the glory. That's already the revelation of the meaning behind it, which just hits you in the face. But he still doesn't have the enablement as much as he would have if someone said, here's the keys to my car. Here's what you need to be able to do the work you have to do. Here's this and here's that. But he doesn't create any glory. He just says, I put an alarm clock by your bed, and 6 a.m. it's going to ring. What is this alarm clock that just goes beep, 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 beep? That when we fall asleep and we don't want to get up, we think it's a car backing up or a truck backing up. Yeah, I know everybody has that same problem. You press snooze and then it comes on again. And then you start feeling the truck's coming into you and you wake up, but that's really not the way it's intended. So what happens if the alarm clock rings? Now, this alarm clock is an enabler because he sleeps very heavy. He's very tired and he can't go to work if he's not given his own strength, his own abilities, if it's not activated. The alarm clock is going to activate his abilities if he chooses to say to himself, wait a second, this is the alarm clock that's ringing for me to remember to go to work and for me to already know and remember that this is very, very important to me. Although it's a stupid alarm clock, it's an inanimate object. It's nothing. How does it know what I have to do? But what it represents and what it gives me is enormous. So what happens then? What happens then is the person applies, the person uses recognition. The person is interpreting from within himself. And that's really what the Gilui, what the revelation of Elul is. The revelation of Elul is the power of Yud Gimel Sarachimim, but without the sensation. So it's not going to happen if the person doesn't choose to focus on this coming from within himself. Because otherwise, it'll be just something else that means meaningless. It's nothing. What is this revelation? That if the Yid remembers and cares to focus and cares to use this strength that he's being given, he'll be able to do even greater than someone who receives a great big inspiration. Why? Because this is for every level Yid. This Gilui, Gimel Sarachim, is to reach the most outer kind of Yid that all he has is his own little spark. He doesn't have anything than his own spark of Hashem. He could be reached because he has a receiver. But inspiration won't work for him because it means nothing to him. Anything external that doesn't touch his essence is not going to reach him. He's too far out. Guy never ate gefilte fish in his life, and you say, hey, come to my house, I have gefilte fish. I don't know what gefilte fish is. You're not getting him with the stuff that gets people that are a little closer, that are a little involved, and they just need to fix up some things. He's all the way out there, as the way it's brought. The Rebbe quotes from the Frierdiker Rebbe, I believe. They're very, very far out. And then the Rebbe explains what's taka the difference between the king in his clothes and the king in the field. The king in the field reveals a higher level, but it's not a greater revelation. It's exclusive. It's to those that can access the king. It's those that can reach the king. It's those that are close enough to see the king. Yes, it's showing a much greater, majestic level of the king. So it's a higher revelation, but it's not a more accessible revelation. The other kind of revelation is more for everyone and for as far as it can go. This revelation reveals the higher greatness, glory of the king, but it's not a greater revelation. It reveals higher, but it doesn't give you more access, and it doesn't reach as far. So this is the idea of Elul. The idea of Elul is the Yid has to return. The Yid has to come back to the Eibishter, and that has to come from the Yid, because that's what Tshuva is, and that's what the Avodah, what's required. Because if it's done superficially and artificially, then he's not going to be a proper vessel, because it's not coming from him. So he's not a vessel to receive that great, big glorified, glorious revelation on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Now the Rebbe says we can understand where we have the Vav Lamed, the V'doidi Li, in Elul. What is the V'doidi Li and the Eibishter is to me? That's this inspiration. That's this initiative, which is not so glorified. But there is that first step that comes from Hashem. And still you call it the Yid's Avodah. Why do you still call it the Yid's Avodah? Because it didn't make him do it. It just gave him the ability to choose to do it, and he has how to do it. He has with what to do it. So then the Rebbe will ask at the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe would say, so hold on. Anila Doidi comes first. But according to this, the Yid would never start his process of coming back to Hashem without this enabler that's there for him to choose to focus on and to begin his Avodah. So the Rebbe says, yes, that's true. But we're not putting it in the order of what step comes first or second. We're putting it in the order of importance. The whole awakening, the whole revelation of this Yud Gimel Sarachim, and it's still a weekday, which means there's no glory there. It's just the empowerment if you choose to use this, if you choose to remember, if you choose to care. That is secondary, because that just highlights and it just sets up the main avodah, which is the Yid initiating. It doesn't really mean initiative. It's not what gets the guy to just become inspired out of nowhere. You know, some people end up in a place. People can end up in a shul. They don't know anything about Torah mitzvahs, but it was beautiful the way they sang together and everything. Very inspired. And sometimes it can awaken within, but it doesn't come close to a person that feels a certain yearning from within himself. Maybe it's not a good example, because just not a good example. But the idea is that the focus and the primary factor here is the Iserus L'Tata.
Maybe a woman would be better. You know, the woman inspires the man, and the man has to pursue.
Right.
Is that a good example?
Yes. That's given Chassidus.
Sorry.
That's explained a lot of times in Chassidus. It's more, there is the man who's the mashpia, and he really is the one who's providing.
She's giving the spark.
Exactly, which is only to get him to be who he is, to awaken him to give. You understand? So he's the giver, he's the one that's coming from him, but at the same time, there has to be a Serus L'Ela before that, because there's nothing without Hashem. How can I even say it's coming from me? But it can come from Hashem in a way that it's more visible and more exciting, and it's more tempting, or it can come from Hashem very subtly. If you care to tune in, if you care to say, hey, 1 second, I need to learn Mishnayos today for my grandfather's Neshama, and I don't have a Mishnayos, I'm stuck in an island. Where's the Mishnayos? Whoa, 1 second, I have it on my phone. That's not because there's a Mishnayos dangling in front of you. And you don't hear a baskol, a voice from heaven saying the Mishnah, and you're saying after it. There's no inspiration for it telling you, you have to learn Mishnayos. You know you have to learn Mishnayos. Now you're going to say, where's my power for it? Ooh, it has everything. Just want to conclude with another point. It's only the beginning of the Maimer. It just builds and builds. But there's a very, very beautiful thing that the Rebbe explains. The Rebbe analyzes the Alter Rebbe's words. I know that I have 2-3 minutes. I won't go over. I'll try to get it in. If I don't get it in, it'll inspire or encourage everybody to go look for the rest of the Maimer. In case you didn't know it already, or you need a review. The Alter Rebbe says a mashal, but this mashal, like I said, has to be very carefully studied and understood. There's no such thing as it's not poetry. It's not poetry. The Alter Rebbe says that the king welcomes everybody with a warm face, with a very welcoming face, and he shows them a happy, smiling face. That means he's very welcoming, friendly, warm, and also he shows everyone smiling face, a cheerful, joyful face. So the Rebbe says, hey, we're crossing the line here. Isn't it supposed to be about the mashal, about telling you that everybody could choose to go to the king? We're focusing on the guy choosing to go to the king. We're not talking about what happens after that. It's too hard to explain in such a short time, but I'll just say something that might help percolate in the minds of the listeners. The Rebbe says, remember we said that this is a kind of awakening that could reach the furthest person? Let's understand one thing. Everyone could make his own move. That means get a little bit off his standard or his norm and try to go closer. But there are those that are so far that even wanting to go is already a very big step. I wish I could. But they need an extra boost that is still considered that it's coming from them. Because for them, that extra boost is still going to make it very hard for them to follow through unless they're determined. So the king welcomes him with a smiling face means it's that extra little push to get him to still use this, and it should still be coming from him. And then the Rebbe is going to explain what is a smiling face, and the Rebbe explains the difference between the two. It's just amazing, but
just with regards to the alarm clock, can you go over that one